Got her back down. Find my troops, find my troops.
Hello again everyone, it is me, Matsimus. I really appreciate you being on today's video, so thank you for stopping by. Today we are talking about military tactics and why armoured reconnaissance is so important for any battle group or armoured force. Now, armoured reconnaissance is one of those things that you just have to have. You can't just send in a spearhead of armour not knowing what you're going up against. Whether it be minefields, anti-tank weapons, tanks, blockades, obstacles, there's a whole host of things that can make any tank crew's life an absolute living hell. And it's up to cavalry scouts, armoured reconnaissance regiments of the British Army, all sorts of different units out there in the world to find these obstacles, find these threats, and make it more presently known what's going on the battlefield. A tank commander's worst nightmare is going into something that he can't see. He doesn't know what's coming, at least for the most part. Of course, the battlefield will change in any one moment or instant. However, if he is given more information, either as a tank commander or even a troop commander or even a battalion commander, he has a better overall picture of what he has to bring to the fight. There is always a ratio in NATO of at least 3 to 1 in any kind of armed force conflict. So if you have a squadron size strength, you're going to want to be sending a battalion size strength almost to try and engage the targets you're going up against. Now, I love my tanks, I really do. I love everything about them that they do, the main guns, the spearhead, punching through the front, the armoured fist. But it would be nothing without other supporting arms such as the infantry, the artillery, and every other branch of the military that keeps them rolling. Now, since World War II, the world's major armies have really tackled the twin organisational issues of the levels at which to deploy reconnaissance forces, and how to equip them based on the combination of experience, the implementation of technological developments, and the different kind of operation environments they're going into. For many years, the Cold War and the Central Front dominated the equipment and organisation of reconnaissance units on both sides of the Iron Curtain. In the atmosphere that we're in today, really the United States has deployed reconnaissance units above the divisional level, units that also had the unique border guard mission in Germany for several decades. The NATO allies fielded various reconnaissance vehicles. The British and French favoured light tanks and wheeled armoured personnel carriers, while the Germans combined main battle tanks and armoured cars in their reconnaissance battalions. The Soviet concept of reconnaissance transcended from the formation of dedicated reconnaissance units, while the Soviets maintained such units at every level from regiment to division and equipped with a combination of armoured and wheeled vehicles. They organised for attack and defence into formations that had specific reconnaissance or security responsibilities apart from the reconnaissance units. The Red Army used divisional reconnaissance battalions, most of the time when operationally, and placing it forward as far as possible to its parent unit to scout forward. The division and lower units depended on task-organised combined arms force, from its organic units called the Combat Reconnaissance Patrol, to conduct tactical reconnaissance. Outside of Central Europe, the Israeli Defense Force formulated its own ideas on the organisation and equipment of reconnaissance forces. After heavy combat losses in the open desert by lightly equipped but stealthy reconnaissance units, the IDF made these elements a lot heavier, equipping them with tanks and armoured personnel carriers. Ironically though, reconnaissance units again suffered quite heavy losses in 1973 when, because of their increased combat power, they were committed to high-intensity battles such as the Battle of the Chinese Farm. The American experience since World War II saw reconnaissance units becoming progressively heavier also, with main battle tanks replacing light tanks and tracked armoured vehicles, replacing jeeps and other armoured cars and the like. Despite several attempts to remove them from the cavalry force structure, tanks remained an integral part of such units until the Modular Army reorganisation, and, in fact, continued as a key component in the only remaining armoured cavalry regiment even after the implementation of the new structure. With heavier reconnaissance units, American commanders viewed such units as additional manoeuvre elements and therefore so used them in Desert Storm and in Iraq in 2003. We saw Bradleys engaging T-62s, 72s, whatever it may be, from long range with the anti-tank guided missiles and the TOW missiles as a reconnaissance unit. That's not how it should have been. Later reconnaissance organizations incorporated advances in helicopter technology. Hybrid air-ground squadrons appeared, but operationally these units suffered from the aviation imperative to place all helicopter assets under the same aviation commander. Only in the Armoured Cavalry Regiment, where the regimental commander controlled the aviation and ground assets without a higher aviation headquarters, did such units work together well. Air cavalry squadrons in the Air Assault Division and Light Divisions provided their worth, obviously, in Vietnam. However, in the post-Vietnam era, similar to the tank-heavy ground squadrons, commanders often used these units primarily for their firepower rather than for their reconnaissance capabilities. In the 1990s, after tests conducted at the National Training Center, the US Army began to use the Humvee extensively in reconnaissance roles, even with heavy units. While such a move seemed quite ineffective in the NTC exercise environment, in a real-life practice, commanders often feared for the survival of each unit and gave them rear security, normally guard patrols, traffic control, demolition of enemy equipment, prisoner guards, headquarters guard missions, something that I'm sure any cavalry scout is not really going to be too happy to do. Another reoccurring theme is the organization of hybrid units. The original hybrid reconnaissance units were of horse mechanized units. Before and during World War II, combatant armies converted all sorts of units completely to motorized or mechanized transportation. Since the development of the helicopter and its application to that reconnaissance role as well, most reconnaissance units have consisted of a combination of both ground and air elements. However, in the US division, where additional helicopters existed outside the divisional squadron, the almost universal tendency was to split the ground and air assets and have those reconnaissance helicopters operate either as an independent unit or under the control of the aviation brigade. The new version of the hybrid unit seen in the Modular Army or the RSTA squadrons that we see today is combining scouts, who have always been considered combat troops, with surveillance and other military intelligence style assets that have been in the past considered a combat support element. The Soviets had such a unit in their divisional reconnaissance battalion that contained a radio and radar company. Operationally, this always was used apart from the rest of the battalion. Before the development of military aircraft and the decline of the horse, reconnaissance units existed at all levels from tactical to operational. Generals had few other means than horse cavalry at their disposal to find the location of the enemy very quickly. The counter-reconnaissance imperative often saw opposing cavalry forces cancel each other out in their efforts to defeat the opposing horsemen or to just find the other poor buggers. As seen in World War I, the result was often ineffective in reconnaissance of both sides using horses. The airplane took over a large portion of the operational reconnaissance mission, to the extent that most armies no longer even deploy reconnaissance units to the larger than the squadron level. In opposition to this trend, the US Army has actually retained the Armoured Cavalry Regiment, or ACR, as a core reconnaissance unit since World War II. However, commanders have generally used the ACR more often as an extra combat unit than an operational reconnaissance asset, particularly in Vietnam and, as I mentioned, Operation Desert Storm. Recent US Army modular doctrine and organizational reorganization initiatives actually said that they wanted to dedicate ground units in operational reconnaissance roles. The light cavalry regiments of the US military were converted to striker brigades, despite the continued retention of a single ACR. The emerging doctrine for using modular reconnaissance assets above brigade level really stressed the technical surveillance activities that states that the brigade does not conduct offensive or defensive operations, nor does it conduct security operations. It's there to be a reconnaissance unit. In other words, guys, general purpose combat units at higher levels are now expected to conduct missions traditionally assigned to cavalry units, which is reconnaissance. Now, the purpose of today's video is to really reinforce how important it is that having that reconnaissance in place and that they can do their job properly to give you that better picture as a battlefield commander is so integral to success and winning that battle. You know, putting the resources that you have into a combat situation is not always the best way to go. The Bradley is an exceptional piece of equipment. In the US military, it's been used in multiple different environments, whether it be fighting in built-up areas, lining tanks up with tows from long distance on their own in the middle of nowhere, or whatever else roles that they've been put in. They're fantastic bits of kit. But I think, as a reconnaissance unit, they really need to be focused on being reconnaissance. You know, finding locations, not engaging, getting the information and pulling back out of there. The US military is starting to push further into that kind of doctrine as, you have this asset on your side, Let's try and use it what it should be used for. We shouldn't be sending Bradleys forward to engage the enemy. We should be using them as a reconnaissance asset, pulling them back and letting the Abrams and the main battle group do the damage. And that's why it's so important to have that reconnaissance element and to not mistreat it in some regard. Now, I'm not saying that, Doctrine is wrong or that it's not the right way. What I'm saying is that I think in the evolution, so to speak, of reconnaissance, sometimes some militaries can lose their way with how they use that asset. I have a very strong reconnaissance unit, heavy and light, or even medium duty, I guess, unit to do the job. Could I still use a heavy reconnaissance, armored reconnaissance unit to do some fighting? Sure, let's just use them. But that's really not their purpose. They could do it well, I'm sure they could, but it's risk. It's a lot of risk to an armored unit to have that reconnaissance asset go into a combat engagement, be lost, and then potentially not have that visual picture, that heads up of what's coming on for the rest of the battle group. Guys, I hope you took a little bit of information in today about how, the US military is working with their cavalry units and how reconnaissance overall has kind of been a hybrid of different, disciplines, different activities. But at the end of the day, the US military is trying to get back to using, cavalry scouts as cavalry scouts and trying to use them as reconnaissance elements and not as this unit that's going into a full-blown combat situation. That being said, if they have the capability to, they're always going to be ready to make the fight if they have to, and that is awesome because I have a huge respect for cavalry scouts and any reconnaissance element worldwide and worldwide military. So if you are part of a reconnaissance element, Marines, Air Force, whatever it may be, huge respect to you. You have a ton of skill. It takes a lot of balls to go into an operation environment ahead of the main task force. No one's really there to help you out for a long time. Get eyes on the enemy, potentially get engaged, and have to get back out of there. So big respect to you all. I hope you enjoyed today's video, everyone. If you did, please leave me a like, please leave me a comment, and I'd love to hear what you think about today's video. If you want to support me, go check out my Patreon website. You're more than welcome to donate towards my channel to support me, and I thank every single one of you for doing so, and I hope to see you again next time. If you want to be notified of any upcoming videos, click the little bell button by the subscribe button, and I'll see you again next time. All the best. Bye-bye.